Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Hey, everybody there. Hi, familiar faces. Really nice to see you all. Everybody in Brussels and beyond. Hello, everybody. Yeah, and do share in the chat how you're feeling today, because after all, News and Booze is about community building and supporting one another. So just put in one word how you're feeling today. I'm feeling a bit, oh, my computer just ran out just before we're starting. So I'm going to have a sip of water. And I did mute everybody today. I managed to figure that out. So Gaelle, as our presenter, you'll need to unmute yourself before you use it.
I think I just did. Can you hear me?
Yay, brilliant.
All right. Let me just
Brilliant. So we're going to go. So hi, everyone. So now maybe everybody can mute themselves again. That's really kind of you. We have 54 people already on the call, which is really nice. And we have 100 signed up, so we have a full house today. So just to give a little introduction, this is our second in the News and Booze online series. Normally we meet for the last 4 years in Brussels once a month to share ideas and to be inspired and have interesting speakers along, like Gaelle, for example, today. Yeah, what struck me about the last News and Booze online is that we're actually attracting people from around the world. So that's really cool, because obviously we're all in this together, trying to make the right changes that are needed to make the world a better place. So that's really nice. So welcome all of you around the world, outside Brussels. Maybe in the chat as well, put where you are, so we can have a sense of where everybody is today, as well as how they're feeling. So, hello. Let me introduce myself first. So I'm Jo Sullivan, for those of you who don't know me. I run a small boutique consultancy in Brussels, dealing with strategic communication and sustainability issues. And I've been doing that for the last 12 or so years. 4 years ago, we founded News and Booze. And let me pass now to my co-host, Julia, who will tell you more about News and Booze before we get going with the session. Julia?
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you, Jo. So I'm Julia. I work as communications manager at a network in Brussels called the European Network on Debt and Development, which works on financial justice in Europe and around the world. And I am currently, yes, on lockdown with my 2 small children. So anyone out there in that situation, I'm with you with how you're feeling in the chat. But yeah, so we've been running, as Jo said, for the last three years. Normally meet up hosted by the EEB in Brussels, but now we're online. And so just a couple of things to say. Thank you everyone who filled in the survey that was circulated. We have a Facebook group for News and Booze, and we have many hundreds of members on there now. So thank you for those of you who filled that in. We take the feedback seriously. So really looking forward to this session on storytelling, because storytelling was something quite a lot of the respondents said they wanted to hear more about. So great on this session today. Also on issues like social media, creative communications, and monitoring and evaluation. So we'll look at that in the future as well. Thank you for that feedback. And also interested in journalists, which I think we normally hold these sessions monthly, and we're trying to do that now online. Next time, we think our session will be run by quite a high profile journalist in Brussels, but with a very development and migration and so on background, so that should be exciting. But we'll remind you of that at the end. If you join the Facebook group and if you register for these events, then you will get that information in the future. So make sure you join that, and otherwise I'll let Jo introduce Gaelle and stop.
Yeah, before I do that, I'm just looking at the little chat function. So we've got comments like enthralled, excited, fabulous, fine, motivated, creative and curious, exhausted. Yeah, we all get that. totally. And from people in Budapest, from Richmond, Virginia, hello, and from Ireland so far. So that's great. So welcome everybody. As we go through the session today, do feel free to put your comments or insights or questions in the chat function, and then I'll deal with those as we go along. And so today is an exciting day. It's when literature meets EU advocacy. And you know, all of us who work in the Brussels bubble, we're used to EU jargon. We're getting better with storytelling over the past years. But certainly we've never really been forced to focus our minds on how literature, creative writing can really help us do better in our work. So we're really, really pleased to have today a special speaker, not just because she's going to introduce us. She doesn't work in this world we work in, which is really exciting. So she's going to kind of force us to think differently. But also she's not in Brussels, and because all of our events have been in Brussels so far, we've always been tied to Brussels speakers. So it's exciting to have Gaelle, who's French, but she lives in London. So that's an exciting dynamic as well. So Gaelle, over to you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Julia, for asking me to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm not so familiar with this webinar, so please, I'm going to tell you in advance, excuse me for moments where I might get a bit lost, and I will make mistakes, but I'm sure we will get along and we will get somewhere despite my lack of habitude. Today, I will talk about the power of narration to reach out to people's value, beliefs, and emotions. And I'm going to articulate my presentation in 3 parts. The first part would be why stories are so important. And we will go along about that, how they can impact your audiences, and which narration you can use to reinforce your communication. So those will be the 3 parts we will look into, and we will develop. So when I will talk about either creative writing or narration or storytelling. The 3 words will refer to what I call a writing, which displays imagination and invention, on the contrary to journalistic writing or academic writing. And then as we go along, we will get a more detailed definition of what writing a story is really about, and how creative writing is not only about writing a story, but it's on how to humanize your communication. So first, maybe I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. And I thought I would use the words of G.D. Salinger in The Catcher in the Rye, the very beginning of the book. And he could do a better presentation than me to start with. So I'm going to read that for you now. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you will probably want to know is where I was born, and what my childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me. And in the second place, my parents would have about 2 emojis apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They are nice and all, I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. Okay, I think that the power of the words, that's what I would like each of you to take back after that webinar. So there will be a couple of readings as we go along, but I'm sure you're quite curious to know a little bit more about me. So I'm going to tell you that I studied politics and law. And when I graduated, I wanted to change the world. At the same time, I started reading a lot of books, and the passion had started. It was planting in me a little seed that will grow slowly but surely, the dream of becoming a writer. But then I went to work in Asia for a couple of years with refugees. And then life kicked in, and then love, and then children, and then more reading, and then writing started. And then going to creative writing classes started. I went there and I enjoyed them and they helped me. And as I was often asked for my advice and my opinion on others people writing, I decided that I could maybe open my own creative writing classes, which I did. So I trained for that. And I've been teaching creative writing for 8 years now. Briefly, I see myself more as a facilitator than a teacher, really. A little bit like a doula, you know, this spiritual midwife that accompany delivery. I probably accompany the birth of words, of text. That's how I see myself. So I have a website. You can see you can see it on the deck right now, and you can go on it and you can learn more about me through that website. So storytelling is the oldest form of education. Terry Tempest Williams, she's a writer and an activist, an American writer and activist. I like that sentence because it's reminding us why stories are so important. Anthropologists suggest that storytelling is the defining feature of our species. We are story animals. If we think about it, all we do in life can turn into a story. The day we got our flat, the minute we met the person we wanted to be married to or spend our life with, or when we go for a job interview, all these are stories. And when we meet friends, people, colleagues, what we do, we always use narration to share. We have, how was your job interview? And then we use a bit of narration. So we are composed of story. We are story animals. And I would distinguish three types of stories that we carry and that have an impact on our identity. There are personal stories, like I just mentioned. There are also social stories, social belongings, Which country were you born into? Were you born in a country that was at peace or at war? Did you grow up with fear? Were you part of a minority? Were you born in a family that was poor or that was rich? All these backgrounds are social stories that have a big impact on our identity. And there's a third type of stories that we're made of, is what I would call the unconscious stories that we carry. The stories, the dreams that our parents may have had on us. We might not be aware of it, but they kind of have an influence on who we're trying to become. Some social stories as well, like something that have happened to us when we were very young and we don't remember, and that's like sleeping in our unconscious, but that are also a big part on our decision making, on who we become, what we act, our values, our beliefs. So we have to really remember that and you have to remember that when trying to communicate to an audience. You are communicating to animals, story animals, and people that have a lot of story that have a massive impact on the way they're going to react to your messages. So, yeah. Yes, I was going to say, sometimes we develop pessimistic narratives that leads to self-defeating ways of thinking. That's quite easy to understand. We can have very low confidence in some aspect in our life. Let's say an example of the type of story that we can have, a type of pessimistic narrative that we can have, that can have a big influence for you as communicator. People might say, why do something about the planet? I've never done anything that made a difference in my life. So when you are confronted with this type of narratives, it's very hard to arrive with your message and your information and for people to receive them. But so when approaching people, one thing that is important is for you to try and find out what type of narrative are these people carrying in themselves. So that, because now what we know, and thanks to behavioral psychology, is that we can change the story that we carry. We don't have to live with this story forever, be it individual stories or being social stories. How do we change stories that we carry? By bringing new stories in, by bringing new story that will be powerful enough, and that's why it's difficult. Story will be powerful enough to replace the old ones that are maybe stopping us from being who we want to be, or act how we want to be, or change the world how the activist or you want the people to do. So yes, exactly. So how, yes, no, I wanted to say is that in a way, there is two ways that we change. We change when we're afraid, or we change when we're inspired, if we simplify it. Information tend to push the button of the fear, especially in today's world, because we all realize that there is a major urgency that we're facing, which is the climate, the biodiversity emergency, but also the social justice emergency. Let's say we talk about the three ones. Information, there has been a lot of information. Who doesn't know about the problems of today? Unless you're hiding in a cave somewhere and you really have turned off all the media for as long as 2-3 years, it's almost impossible to ignore the urgency of the situation. So it means that the information that are going to press on the button inspiring is the information that stories can bring. And we're going to look into that now, how storytelling can impact your audience. Let me up. I like that quote, things do not change, we change. Henry David Thoreau, you may know him, is an American nature writer. And he went to live a couple of years in the nature and trying to prove to the rest of the world that we could live way more simply. And I forgot right now the title of his book, which I have downstairs, but you can find it easily if you type his name online. So how do story impact us? I like that sentence that says, stories break down complexity, exploring big themes and questions through a narrow lens. So whether we realize it or not, we are very active participant when we hear stories. We're not being passive, we're being active. Why? Because stories invite us to create a world in our head through the different the different way a story activates, resonate in us. What has happened with the, yes, that's probably why we remember some teachers very well, because they were probably very good storytellers. I wanted to read you, if that's okay, a story from Kafka. Would that be a good idea? It's called The Sudden Walk. Listen. When you seem finally to have made up your mind to spend the evening at home, when you have put on your smoking jacket and settle down after supper with a light on the table to the piece of work or the game that usually occupies you till bedtime, when the weather outside is so unpleasant, like today in London, not sure about Belgium, when the weather outside is so unpleasant that it makes staying at home the obvious thing to do, when by now you have been sitting quiet at the table for so long, then to go out would cause general astonishment. When the staircase is anyhow dark now and the front door locked, and when despite all this, you get to your feet in a sudden fit of restlessness, change your jacket, promptly reappear dressed for the street, explain that you have to go out, and after a brief word of goodbye, actually do so, estimating the degree of irritation you may have left behind from the force with which you slammed the flat door. When you then rediscover yourself down in the street, your limbs responding with particular agility to the unexpected freedom you have procured for them, when you feel all your decisiveness concentrated within you as a result of this one decisive act, when it strikes you with more than usual significance, then your power to effect the swiftest of change with ease and to cope with it outstrips your need to do so. And when in such a mood you go striding down the long street, then for the space of that evening, you have completely broken out the ranks of your family and risen up to your true stature. I don't know if that, that text is only one sentence. So it's maybe quite a demanded text. I hope you could enter the poetic sensitivity of Kafka, who is trying to tell us that sometimes there is this slight inclination in us to do something, and then we get up and do it. And he shows how there is all this force of immobility at the beginning. Then we have that inclination, we get up, we go out, despise. So so stories, how do they talk to us? They transport us. I don't know if that in that short text you were able to feel a little bit transport in a house in 1900 in Prague, where Kafka was living. So story transporters, the more they use a vivid imagery and retellable character. That's a very important thing. If you remember one thing of today, if you want people to be moved, use vivid imageries. How do you do vivid imageries? By using your five senses: your sight, your sense of smell, sense of hearing, sense of touch, sense of taste sometimes, or your five senses. So when you do that, people get into what you're trying to tell them. The image is a story way more. What it creates in us, it creates empathy. By reading stories, we meet people that we would never meet otherwise. And we start to understand, because stories is the only way that it's even better. It's probably the only storytelling that can convey as much the thinking process of human beings. Film can convey situation, can convey tension, can convey emotions, but they can not so much convey thinking. And so that way that create empathy. It has been proven that people that read fiction have more empathy than people that don't. That's why we invite people to read story with their children and make children read stories so that they develop their capacity for empathy. A good story is also a story that creates a tension, a narrative tension for people, to attract people's attention. Something that's very precious right now is how to get people's attention. There is so much on offer that it's very hard to capture the people's attention for more than a few minutes, a few seconds sometimes. Now people write flash stories, the very mini short stories that that last a few minutes. But doesn't matter the length of your story, if it's a novel, if it's a short story, if it's an article in which you're going to use some storytelling, try and create a little bit of tension, a little bit of suspense for people to stay with you until you take them where you want to take them, which is overcome some obstacle, which is to a goal that you have defined with them. Yeah. So, yes, I was saying earlier that I'm talking about attention. Yeah, talking about attention. There has been something that we've realized is when you talk to people with information, statistic, data, fact. You talking from a place of knowledge. You, the person that knows, and the people in front of you are the people that need to know. You're trying to convince them, and therefore you trying from a point in a way of superiority. Where you're sharing a story, you're talking from a different place. You're talking from a place which is, I'm going to share with you an experience, and I want you to listen to that experience and to see how you can relate to it. So no one likes to being told what to do. We build walls and we shut down when we feel preached at or dominated or bored. Whereas a storyteller shares an experience, his experience or someone else's experience. So people are more open to listen to a story than to listen to a lesson that's being told to them. So that's something that we need to remember when we're trying to convince people. Let's approach them in a more friendly way. I'm not better than you. I'm just a human being with stories, and I want to share you one of my stories to see if it makes sense to yours, or if it actually is going to help you understand a bit more what my message is about. So now I'm just going to go to yes, so I wrote in that slide, remember, humans are influenced by the stories they tell themselves. Find out the stories of your audience to have a more impactful communication. That's something we're going to talk about now. Which type of creative writing? Which type of recreation writing? In order to do that, one of the first questions to ask is which type of stories your audience are telling themselves. When you use creative writing, it doesn't mean that you're going to use a full story. What's a story? A story is a character that is struggling against some obstacle in order to reach a desired goal. So a character, preferably a retellable character, that has a goal. The goal as a goal, but in order to reach that goal, he's going to face some obstacles. So we're going to see a little bit more into detail what that is about. But when you use creative writing in your communication, you don't always have to use a complete story. You can use artistic forms. Let's say letters. Stefan Zweig wrote many letters. You can use the form of a letter to convey a message, like a letter that this young girl wrote to a parent when she was in that situation. And you can use a few letters of kids to the parent. That can be a very powerful way to use the genuinity of kids and their freshness. You can use fragments, you can use poems, you can use short stories, you can use the artistic form that literature used to convey message. Another way they can use literature in your communication is by using extracts of novels, extracts of plays, a few lines for poems, quotes, really powerful to convey an opinion. Let me give you an example and give you the beginning of a book that I really like, which is called My Name is Lucy Barton, from Elizabeth Strout. Elizabeth Strout is an American writer, and she also wrote Olive Kitteridge. I don't know if it's been turned into a series of 5, 6. She's very good at creating extremely relatable characters. So she's good to read. Let me read you the beginning of that book, and that can show you of maybe an extract that can be quite interesting for you to use. There was a time, and it was many years ago now, when I had to stay in a hospital for almost 9 weeks. This was in New York City. And at night, a view from the Chrysler Building, with its geometric brilliance of lights, was directly visible from my bed. During the day, the building's beauty receded, and gradually it became simply one more large structure against the blue sky. And all the city's big buildings seemed remote, silent, far away. It was May and then June, and I remember how I would stand and look out the window at the sidewalk below and watch the young women my age in their spring clothes out on their lunch breaks. I could see their heads moving in conversation, their blouses rippling in the breeze. I thought how when I got out of the hospital, I would never again walk down the sidewalk without giving thanks for being one of those people. And for many years, I did that. I would remember the view from the hospital window and be glad for the sidewalk I was walking on. I thought we could all do that after the confinement, right? We've been at our windows looking at people going out, and maybe we could be grateful that we can walk and find our freedom. And so I thought that was quite an interesting one to go to. So let me get back to, so I said we can use creative writing in different ways. It doesn't always have to be a story as such. So to find out what kind of storytelling is going to benefit your communication, you need to ask yourself 3 questions. Which message are you trying to give? What do you want to change? That's very important. Which message, what do you want to change? Maybe you can get back to Joe and give some text, and we can have a few questions about that later. Second, what is your audience? And when I said before, what are the story that we said that already, what the story the audience might have that might just help them understand you or might just block them understand you. What's interesting in knowing your audience is that the style of your writing, the tone of voice of your writing is going to change if you're talking to a group of students that just graduated from university or if you're talking to senior government officials, obviously. So that it's important also to take into account. So let's take a case study for now. I was just going to say we could use a case study to develop a little bit on that idea of how you're going to develop a story. So we're going to have a case study. Let's say you want to convince a group of young graduates to work as volunteers for 2 months to develop a campaign on renewable energy. So if we ask ourselves the questions, which narration could help best in that case study? So find a group of students that could be motivated to give 2 months of their time working for free to develop a campaign on renewable energy. So it could be 3 types of stories. I'm realizing that I'm using 3 so many times in that presentation. It must be my lucky number today. You know, the type of story you could use, it could be a story of your organization. You know, the organization, the charity you work for has a story. It might be the story of the founder, you know, what made him create that charity you work with, what obstacles did he have to overcome to make it work. So in your story, you can sometimes go back to the story of your organization. It can be a personal story. The story we tell reflect who we are, and sometimes they can be really powerful to some of the messaging. What we believe in and the future we envision, we can share that with our audience. Everyone has a story to tell that can be empowering for others, so we should not hesitate to read our story. As we said at the beginning, we have plenty of stories in our life, and they can be empowering for others. So we not hesitate. Or it could be a story in the 3rd person. When I mean in the 3rd person, using a he or a she, that can be a true story of someone you know, or of someone that's relates to the work you do, or a story that you create. the story fiction that you invent, so that you can illustrate your point even more. So let's go back to our idea with our students. So if we use a relatable character, maybe a student, we could use a student. That could be quite useful. Our character, if we invented a story in the third person for our case study, we could use a student as a character. What background you describe with vivid images and using our 5 senses? Let's imagine our student is going home after he's graduated. He's sitting in a train because he wants to go back home to drop his stuff at his parents' house. But while he's sitting in the train, there's this woman sitting in front of him. She's way older than him. And she's starting to talk with someone else about the pollution in the river, where him, the student, used to play with his friend as he was a kid. He remembered the river, he remembered the smell of the river, he remembered going there with his friend. And then as much as listening to this woman, he can feel this frustration growing inside him, this anger even. But when he gets home, what happens? There is a little party that has been organized because his dad, they're celebrating because his dad has been looking for a job for a few months. He's finally found a job. Guess where? In the oil refinery that has been polluting the river for the last 5 years. So the situation, we have our student and he's torn apart. He's torn apart in between the anger he's felt, knowing that the river next to where he grew up is now completely polluted. There is no fish in it. But at the same time, the polluter gave a job to his dad. So his family doesn't want to hear about his point of view. So we have our student. So what can be his goal? His goal is how can find a way forward with him being torn apart. And wouldn't it be a goal for him so that a non-polluting energy could maybe create jobs in the regions where I live? So the obstacle is our students has no way to sort out the situation of his dad. He's not going to find a job for his dad. And then what happened? He reads, you know, the offer that we saw at the beginning, that one of you has publicized, finding young graduates to work as volunteer for 2 months to develop a campaign on renewable energy. Our student says, why don't I go and do that? Work for free for 2 months, help promote renewable energy. Like that, it will give me time to reflect on my personal conflict in between cleaning the river that I love and maybe being part of finding a different type of job to my dad. So I invented that story, that case studies. I hope it can help you a little bit see how you yourself could create a story. I just wanted to pause a second to read that quote from George Orwell that you can see, because I think it's really beautiful. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I'm going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention. And my initial concern is to get a hearing. I think that's really important. We start to write because there is some lie that we want to expose, some fact to which we want to draw attention. So I told you that it was very important when you write a story, in order to create vivid imaginary, to describe the characters in your story, the background, using your 5 senses. I think that sentence and that quote from Chekhov says it's way better than me. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. So that's basically a really great sentence to illustrate the Bible sentence of writing: show, don't tell. So, yeah, I thought of an example of storytelling that we can refer to, even though that it's so famous. But in a way, when you think about the civil rights movement in America, I Have a Dream is a piece of storytelling. You know, the main character is Martin Luther King. He uses his own story. He's a narrator, and it's his own story. He's both the narrator, and his goal is equality of race. His obstacles is racism and segregation that was happening all the time. At the time he did. How did he overcome it? Demonstrations, speeches, resistance, charisma. So, and then he wrote, when you read again, I invite you to read again, I Have a Dream. It's really the development of a story with the beginning when he writes, what is the situation? Instead of having a vivid background, which would be a background like the train that we wrote in the previous story, it's the Constitution. It's very powerful how he uses the word to say, the freedom that I want for the American people is already written in the Constitution. So it's so powerful that he uses very strong legal word to just show, and moving word to show that it's already there, but it needs to be implemented. The words are there, it needs to be implemented. So that's very powerful. He has a background, and then he has all these words, and we know, obviously, how he's going to say what he wants, why he wants it, and he's going to invite everybody to be part of that change. So I would really invite you to read that speech again, because, as I said, writing, creative writing is information, give us insight us to change. Oh yes, that's something I wanted to tell you that's important. Information is really important to make a realize a situation and want to change it. But too much information, we have realized, can have a counter effect, because information, when they are there to show us that we need to change, they're usually very dramatic information. They're very sad information. And that information can make us feel powerless. There is too much. What can I do in front of so much problems? And they are useful in the sense that they can press the button fear, and fear can trigger change. But stories are powerful when they can inspire, and then they can trigger the button inspire. What's really, yes, that's something important that I wanted to say as well. It's not always happy ending story. Yeah, a story needs a character, a background, a goal, obstacles, and it also obviously needs an ending. You don't have a story without an ending. An ending doesn't have to be an happy ending. It can be a character might reach a goal, or it might not reach a goal. Both can be as powerful for the message you're trying to convey. That's really important to realize. Something that is really important, I wanted to tell you, is that for a lot of people, it's not always easy to imagine a world when things turn out okay, because they're overwhelmed by so much problem, especially in the world of today. It feels like there is so many dystopian stories out there right now, particularly in terms of climate change, particularly in terms of social justice, particularly in terms of the disappearance of biodiversity. And I think as a result of it, some people have given up. Too many people have given up. So something that really would be, and I think is really useful now, is to use storytelling to help people imagine what it could be in 20 years, in the future, or maybe in 30 years, if we could turn things around. Make people feel, story convey emotion. When we read story, we feel emotion. Make people feel what life could be using visualization triggered by storytelling. What it would be like if you woke up in 20 years, in 30 years, And we had managed a successful transition. And suddenly we are walking around in a world that is different. That's called, writing can be used in that sense, and we call it positive foreshadowing, for people to see what there could be if a just transition to a society that actually works. And that's really interesting, because to go back to behavioral psychology, that's really important for you to remember. Apparently, people can only go somewhere they've first been in their mind. Interesting. Huh? So if by storytelling we give story of what the world could be, a successful world, it will be easier to make people be part of the change that's necessary to get to that world. Because there is nothing, I like that sentence from this poet, sorry, I don't remember the name. They said, we see the world once, the rest is memory. So in order for people to imagine the world in the future, they have to already have the image in their head, living as a memory. So I think for today, the stories that would imagine, that help people imagine a world where we have been successful in bringing about a transition for a better world would be really amazing. So that takes us to my last slide, which is not the end, but the beginning of a new writing adventure. I put question mark because I'm going to invite all of you that are listening to me now for a little writing adventure. What it is, I invite each of you to write a text in which you would describe the world as you wish it to be in 20 years from now. A world where a successful transition would have been managed. What would this world look like? What made it happen? Which obstacles were overcome? Who were the heroes of that adventure? And I even had a little dream, you know, I'm going to share it with you. I thought that if enough of you wrote that text and wanted to send it to me, we could even put it together in a book and print it, and we could call that book We Have a Dream. That's it for today. I'm happy to listen to your questions.
Gaelle, that was amazing. That was so interesting. There were so many nuggets there. And I particularly liked, which is so rare on the webinars we all listen to be able to close my eyes and be transported to another time and another place, and just, it's actually really meditative to be read to. So that's a real pleasure to me. That's been so many years. Just on just the things that I remembered, people can go somewhere they've already been to in their mind. I think that's really interesting, that we have to really make more of an effort in our Brussels bubble to focus on the five senses. We're all kind of brainy, we think. A lot of law, like you, background, also policy background, comms background. And people in policy world, they want to hear the facts, of course, but if we need to bring stakeholders, people, everybody in Europe along, everybody in the world along on this journey, then the idea, instead of, what did you say? You don't lecture, you should tell us, share a story instead. So we're really on the level. Before, there's lots of things that I could talk about, but I've got a few questions in the chat feed now. We have lots of positive feedback, which is great. Fantastic speech about writing in a creative way. That was absolute gold. There we go, and some nice feedback. Couple of questions. So, has Gaelle got any, this is from Emma. Hi Emma, has Gaelle got any advice for comms people? These are kind of comms people in different NGOs, trying to get buy-in and support for storytelling approach in an organization that's traditionally super formal in its tone of voice. So storytelling for a legal audience, do you have any comments on that? And I have also a question, just take two questions, from Heinrich, if I pronounce that correctly. So how in practical terms do I manage to start embedding more storytelling in advocacy policy that's often about dry and technical topics, legislative proposals, EU institutions. So that's the rub, Gaelle. So how do we make this magic more, how do we manage to persuade our bosses in organizations, and how do we manage to do that in a way which makes sense, bringing in some of this literary transportation, as you called it? What did you call it, the exercise? Positive foreshadowing. I kind of like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, I was asked to go and do a creative writing workshop for a hedge fund consultant firm in the city. And I was taken aback. I said, oh my God, I'm French. I go to the, but I just said yes. I thought that was, I felt I could just, and there was these 5 men in suits that just were talking figures, and I had and they all wanted to be able to give some write some article for their companies. And how can they write articles? And it's interesting because we had this, I started having a conversation with them about the fact that comes back to what we said at the beginning. Everything is a story. Even having to write an article to a legal audience, it's a bit hard for me to answer in many detail. I would need to understand way more what is the message you have to try to convey, because even if it's a figure, a message that's full of data, it's still a message. It has an underlying line. It's got an arc, like a story. Are you trying to the people that they have to change? Are you trying to show the people that there's a problem, discrepancy in between the law and the reality? So it would need to have more detail in order to talk about a storyline, but anything is possible. But when I saw these people in the finance world, I just said, but you're not only financial animals. And they were listening to me with their eyes big open. And I said, you're also a human being. You wake up, you have mood. So they started writing a little bit about their doubts, about the fact that they made themselves more human. So how did they do? They humanize the narrator of the article. So how did they do that? They talked about their success. They had one successful story before another, but they also talk about failure, not in a way that was obviously make them lose clients, because in the city, that's something that they don't want to do, but in the way that made them approachable. When we tried to go on that, we realized it wasn't our domain of action. So maybe it's to put doubts, maybe it's to express a previous communication, your previous campaign, and what worked and what didn't work. So you stay in a professional manner, but actually you humanize the way you talk about it by introducing some human facts about it. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. And of course, it's a real challenge. It's something we all face, is how to communicate in a really creative, interesting, engaging way on these points of EU policy, because that's essentially the business we're in Brussels, is all of our communications. A lot of it is around affecting change in EU policy. But a lot of our job, an increasing amount of our job as well, is to reach out to different stakeholders, build bridges, and make EU policy actually relatable to everybody, and why the change is necessary and why it's important. And you touched on some really important points, is how we all make, we don't overtell the story about climate change. It's something I've worked on for 20 years. That how do we then engage more people? There are so many people communicating on it, but like you, I mean, I think one of the points you made was, too much information is overwhelming. And how do you get people into that? I think that's the real challenge.
Yeah, they said.
Let's just take another couple of questions, because I'm conscious of time. We don't have that many more minutes. I've got a question. Are there any good resources to help develop our writing skills? Gaelle is on the, Gaelle will help you develop your writing skills. From how powerful could be an open-ended story? That's interesting, because you mentioned the story has to have an end. So either good or bad. And we see in Hollywood it's mostly good, but in the world of affecting influence on policymakers, sometimes telling a bad story can help them really figure out, oh, what can go wrong.
Yeah.
So what about an open-ended story?
That is the
last question.
Yeah, that is a very good question, because an open-ending story is an ending. And that's going to something that is one technique of writing, which is called ellipses. You know, what not saying everything triggers imagination in the reader. What the information you don't give force your reader to imagine. So in a way, when you go and finish a book, some people love open ending. Actually, we don't know if they are together or not. Some people get mad about it. I want the writer to tell me if finally they're in love or not. And in a way, definitely in your communication, that can be a really good way. First of all, because writing is also a reflection of life, and life as there are many things for which we don't know the end, we don't know the answer, and we're working and living with a lot of unknowns. So yeah, it's also a good option.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Gaelle. I've had so many comments. You should have a look at them in the chat. There's lots of really positive feedback. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're on 50 participants now. Thank you, everybody. We had, I think, 75 at the peak moment, which is really great. It's been really inspiring and stunningly relaxing, I saw as well. I totally agree. Sorry, Gaelle?
Can I just say, if any of you wants to do the writing exercise at the end,
yes,
and,
promo.
Yeah, and send me a text. I can help you. I can help you with some editing. I'm very happy. And why not? We could make it a little project, and I'm happy to take care of the printing of the book and let it show to the world that we all have a dream too in Brussels.
Oh, that's really lovely, Gaelle. Listen, can you give some guidance on how many words? Because we're all of our writers, we have to know how many words.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I was actually not going to give any words.
Oh.
I thought that you feel free. It can be 5 lines, it can be 2 pages. I quite like this idea that everyone feel the space to express what he has to express.
All right, that's brilliant. Yes, so I will do this exercise, and I'm sure Julia will too. And I urge everybody, call to action here. Let's all become better narrators, and let's all write this story and send it to Gaelle. The email is at the bottom there. Before we leave, I would just like to say this is News and Booze, and we have a Facebook group for those of you who haven't joined that already, so you can keep up to date with future events there. And I'll just pass the floor to Julia, if you're still there, to talk about the next event.
Looks like she had some visitors.
You need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry. Just then my son's come in. Just quickly then to say, yes, the next event. Sorry. The next event. Aren't really, Joe. Sorry.
Don't worry. I'll talk about it. Good luck, Julia. Julia has 2 children under the age of 3 at the house, so wow. That's quite a lot. And a husband who's a journalist who's busy just at this moment doing a last-minute story. So. That's our reality we're all living in. But thank you so much, Gaelle. I'm sure everybody virtually is clapping you. And tune into the next News and Booze. So we'll have a really high-profile, interesting journalist. We're not going to tell you who that is, but it's somebody really interesting working on some interesting stuff from the US, based in Brussels. And that will be in the next month or so. So bye, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon. Take care. Stay safe. And talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thank you, Jo. And bye, everyone. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.